The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years. Their ships filled the darkness between worlds like swarms of metal insects. Their soldiers had crushed 100 species under their boots. Every corner of the known galaxy knew the name, and every corner feared it. Admiral Torin stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Burning Truth, watching the empty space of the Outer Rim scroll past on his viewing screens. This was a routine patrol, the kind of boring duty that made even veteran officers sleepy. Nothing ever happened in the Outer Rim. It was dead space, empty and cold. That was why the alert made him spill his drink. "Admiral," his sensor officer said, voice tight with confusion. "We are detecting a vessel, unknown design. It is drifting without power." Torin pushed himself up from his command chair and walked to the sensor station. The screen showed a ship unlike anything in records. It was long and cylindrical, with strange markings on its hull that matched no known language. The metal was dark gray, almost black, and the design was ugly by standards. Functional. Brutal. "Run it through the database again," Torin ordered. "I have run it 7 times, Admiral. There is no match. This vessel belongs to no species." Torin felt something cold move through his chest. In 12,000 years of expansion, they had encountered and conquered every space-faring civilization in the galaxy. There were no unknown species left. There could not be. And yet here was proof that the Empire did not know everything. "Prepare boarding parties," Torin said. "I want to know what that thing is." The boarding took 3 hours. Soldiers in full combat armor cut through the strange ship's hull and moved through its dark corridors with weapons ready. They found endless rows of pods, hundreds of them, all empty. The ship's systems were dead. Dust covered every surface. Then they found the one pod that was not empty. The creature inside was unlike anything the soldiers had seen. It stood on 2 legs but there the similarities ended. It had no scales, no natural armor, no claws or fangs. Its skin was soft and pale, almost fragile-looking. Its body was thin and weak by standards. The pod was still functioning on backup power. The creature inside was alive, sleeping in some kind of frozen state. "What is it?" one soldier asked. "It looks like prey," another answered, "like something we would hunt for sport." They brought the pod back to the Burning Truth. Scientists gathered around it, scanning and measuring and arguing about what species this creature could be. Admiral Torin watched them work, feeling that cold sensation in his chest grow stronger. When they finally woke the creature, it opened its eyes slowly. They were dark eyes, almost black, and they held no fear. The creature looked at the faces around it, looked at their scales and their fangs and their clawed hands, and showed no panic. It simply watched and waited. The scientists tried to communicate using universal translator devices. The creature listened to the clicks and hisses of the language for a long moment. Then it made sounds of its own, strange and soft, pointing at objects and waiting for them to name them. Within 6 weeks, the creature was speaking Basic. His name, they learned, was Han. He came from a world called Earth, a planet that no longer existed. His people had built a great ship called the Eternal Horizon and filled it with sleeping travelers, hopping to find a new home among the stars. They had been drifting for 300 years. The scientists found this information interesting but not concerning. Species, which he called human, was clearly primitive. They had no faster-than-light travel, no energy weapons, no genetic enhancements. They were soft and slow and weak. The Empire had conquered species far more impressive than this. Admiral Torin disagreed. He watched the human through security cameras. He watched how memorized the layout of the ship within 3 days, mapping every corridor and exit in his mind. He watched how the human studied the guards, learning their patrol patterns, noting their weaknesses. He watched how exercised in his cell, pushing his fragile body through movements that built strength and speed. When a guard struck for speaking without permission, Torin watched what happened next. The human moved faster than the cameras could track. One moment the guard was raising his clawed hand for a second blow. The next moment the guard was on the floor, his arm bent at an angle that should not be possible, screaming in pain. Stood over him, breathing hard, those dark eyes showing something new. Not fear, not anger. Calculation. Two more guards rushed into the cell. Did not fight them. He raised his hands in surrender and let them beat him to the ground. But Torin had seen enough. This creature, this weak and primitive thing from a dead world, had broken a warrior's arm in less than 1 second. And he had chosen to stop. That was what worried Torin most. Not the violence, but the control. The human had made a decision in that moment. He had calculated that killing the guards would not serve his purposes. He had surrendered because it was the smart move. Torin sent his report to High Command that night. He recommended that the human be studied further, that the Empire search for more of these creatures, that they be treated as a potential threat rather than simple specimens. High Command disagreed. The human was transported to 4, a prison world where the Empire sent its refuse. Political dissidents, failed rebels, members of conquered species who refused to accept rule. It was a death sentence in all but name. Few prisoners survived more than a year. Torin tried to protest, but his superiors silenced him. The human was nothing, they said, a curiosity from a dead world. There was no need to waste resources on a single weak creature. Admiral Torin returned to his patrol duties and tried to forget about the soft-skinned alien with the dark eyes. But sometimes, late at night, he would remember the way he had looked at the guards, the way he had studied them like they were prey. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They had never encountered a species they could not crush. But Han was not alone. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the eternal horizon had carried other pods, other survivors, other humans. And soon, the galaxy would learn why that mattered. 4 was a world of gray stone and gray sky. The sun never fully rose above the thick clouds that covered everything. Rain fell constantly, cold and sharp like tiny needles against the skin. The Empire had chosen this place for their prison because nothing could survive here without their permission. Han arrived in chains, thrown from a transport ship onto the muddy ground of the main yard. Hundreds of aliens watched him fall. They were creatures of every shape and size, prisoners from a dozen different species, all of them broken by years of cruelty. Overseer, the commander of 4, walked a slow circle around the human. He was tall even by standards, his scales a dark green that was almost black. His eyes were yellow and cold. "This is the creature that injured one of our soldiers," said, loud enough for all the prisoners to hear. "This weak, soft, pathetic thing, look at it. It has no claws, no fangs, no armor. It is less than prey. It is nothing." He kicked in the stomach. The human curled around the blow, gasping for air. "You will die here," said. "Perhaps in a week, perhaps in a month, but you will die and no one will remember you." Walked away, leaving in the mud. The other prisoners watched for a moment, then turned back to their work. They had seen new arrivals before. They had seen hope die in this place too many times to care anymore. But one prisoner did not turn away. She was human-like. Her name was, and she had been on the eternal horizon too, in a different section of the great ship. The had found her pod 3 years ago and brought her to 4, expecting her to die like all the others. She had not died. Had been a combat medic on Earth, trained to keep soldiers alive in the worst conditions. She had used that training here, treating injured prisoners with whatever materials she could find or steal. She had made herself useful, made herself valuable, and that had kept her alive. Now she watched push himself up from the mud, watched him look around the yard with those calculating eyes, and she felt something she had not felt in years. Hoping. That night she found him in the sleeping quarters, a massive cave carved into the gray rock where prisoners huddled together for warmth. "You are human," she said in Korean, the language of their homeland. His eyes went wide. He stared at her like she was a ghost. "I thought I was the only one," he whispered. "There are more of us, 3 more here on this world. They do not know we are connected. They think we are all from different pods, different sections of the ship." She told him about the others. An engineer who kept the prison's machines running because they were too lazy to do it themselves. He had been quietly sabotaging systems for months, making small changes that added up over time. A soldier who pretended to be broken and obedient while secretly training other prisoners to fight. He had spent 2 years building a network of warriors from 6 different species. And herself, who had been gathering medical supplies and information, waiting for the right moment. "We have been waiting," she told, "waiting for something to change, waiting for a spark." Looked at her in the darkness of the cave. "What do you need me to do?" "You injured a guard. The story has spread across the prison. Every species here has been told all their lives that they cannot hurt that resistance is impossible. You proved that was a lie." She reached out and gripped his arm. "You are the spark, now we need to build the fire." The planning took 3 months. They met in secret, always in different places, always careful to avoid the guards. Studied the prison layout, mapping every corridor and every exit, counting every guard and learning every patrol pattern. Continued her medical work, building trust with prisoners from every species. Prepared the machines for what was coming. Trained fighters in hidden corners of the caves, teaching them techniques that size and strength could not defeat. The hardest part was convincing the other prisoners to believe. "You do not understand," a merchant name told them. "They have ruled for 12,000 years. They have crushed every rebellion, destroyed every resistance. Fighting them is suicide." Looked at the alien with his dark human eyes. "On my world we had a saying, the tree that does not bend will break. They have never learned to bend. They think strength is everything. That is why they will lose." Pretty words said, but words do not stop weapons. "No," agreed, "but strategy does, speed does. The willingness to die for something greater than yourself does." He leaned closer. "The fight to keep what they have. We fight because we have nothing left to lose. That makes us more dangerous than they can imagine." Slowly, the prisoners began to believe. On the night of the uprising, rain fell harder than usual. Thunder shook the gray stone walls. The guards were distracted, huddled in their warm towers, waiting for their shift to end. Killed the lights across the entire prison. Every lamp, every screen, every security camera went dark at the same moment. Fighters moved through the blackness like shadows. They had trained for this, learned to fight without sight, to use sound and touch to find their targets. Guards fell before they could even scream. Led teams to the armory, to the communication center, to the control rooms. Prisoners who had been slaves for years suddenly held weapons in their hands. And walked through the chaos toward Overseer's quarters. He found the commander trying to call for help, slamming his claws against a communications panel that would not respond. Spun when he heard enter, his yellow eyes wide with fury and fear. "You hissed, you did this." "Yes," said simply. Lunged at him, claws extended, fangs bared. He was faster than any human, stronger than any human, more deadly than any human. But had studied him for months. He knew exactly how would attack, exactly how he would move. The human stepped aside at the last moment, caught this arm, and used his own weight against him. Hit the floor hard. Before he could rise, had a blade pressed against his throat. "You said I would die here," said quietly. "You were wrong." The uprising lasted 12 minutes. When it was over, the prisoners controlled 4. The surviving guards were locked in cells. The communication array was in human hands. Stood at the controls, ready to send a message across the sector. She looked at, waiting. He nodded. Her voice went out across the stars, reaching every ship, every station, every world in range. "This is 4. The prison has fallen. The guards are defeated. Humanity has arrived in this galaxy, and we have a message for every species living under rule." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was iron. "We do not kneel." Message from 4 spread across the galaxy like a wave of fire. Every ship with a communication system heard it. Every station, every world, every corner of space received those words. Humanity has arrived, and we do not kneel. For most species, it was the first hope they had felt in centuries. The Empire reacted with anger and confusion. A prison world had fallen. Impossible. Embarrassing. High Command ordered a complete information blackout, trying to stop the message from spreading further. But it was too late. The words had already reached billions of ears. On the merchant world of Vara, a human woman named heard the broadcast in a crowded market square. She had been in stasis on the eternal horizon like the others, discovered by traders 2 years ago. Unlike the others, she had not been sent to prison. They had recognized her value immediately. Had been a diplomat on Earth. She understood how to talk to people, how to find common ground between enemies, how to build bridges where others saw only walls. They had used her skills to negotiate better trade deals with a dozen species. Now she saw a different opportunity. She went to the council that same night, walking into their great hall without invitation. The council members, tall and thin with silver skin and large dark eyes, watched her approach with surprise. "You heard the message," said. "You know what it means." Elder, the oldest member of the council, leaned forward. "It means they will crush this rebellion like they have crushed every rebellion before. It means anyone who helps the humans will be destroyed." "Perhaps," agreed. "Or perhaps it means they are not as strong as they pretend to be. A single prison world guarded by their soldiers fell in 12 minutes. 12 minutes. What does that tell you about their power?" The council members looked at each other. Doubt flickered in their dark eyes. "They have ruled for 12,000 years," Elder said. "We have survived by staying neutral, by not drawing their attention." "And how has that neutrality served you?" asked. "You pay tribute to the Empire. You follow their laws. You bow when their ships enter your space. Is that survival, or is it slavery with a different name?" Silence filled the great hall. "The Empire will fall," continued. "Not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but it will fall. Every empire in history has fallen. The only question is which side you will be on when it happens." The council debated for 3 days. In the end, they agreed to provide secret support, ships for transport, safe harbors for refugees, communication networks to spread information. It was not an alliance, not officially, but it was a beginning. While built political connections, another human was changing the rules of war itself. Had been a physicist on Earth, one of the minds of her generation. When they found her pod drifting in deep space, they had brought her to a research station, hopping to study her primitive brain. Instead, she studied them. They had used the same faster-than-light technology for 10,000 years. They had never thought to improve it because they had never needed to. Their ships were fast enough to crush any enemy. Why make them faster? Looked at their engines and saw 1,000 ways to make them better. "Your design is wasteful," she told the scientist who guarded her. "You lose 40% of your energy in the transition to faster-than-light speed. That is ridiculous. A child could improve this." The scientists laughed at her. What could a primitive human know about advanced technology? 3 months later, escaped the research station on a stolen shuttle that moved twice as fast as any ship. She reached 1 step ahead of the pursuit fleet, carrying blueprints in her head that would change everything. When she met, she smiled for the first time in years. "I brought you a gift," she said. "The key to faster ships, better weapons, and engines that cannot match." Looked at the designs she drew on the floor of his command center. "Can you build these?" "I can build better," said. "Just give me time and resources." Time was something they did not have. They were coming. High Command had finally recognized the threat. They assembled a punitive fleet of 200 warships, commanded by Admiral, a veteran of 100 campaigns. His orders were simple: destroy 4, kill every prisoner, and make an example that no other world would ever forget. The fleet arrived in the system expecting easy prey. They found something else entirely. Minyu had been a military historian on Earth. He had studied every war humanity had ever fought, every strategy that had ever won or lost a battle. When he woke from stasis on a transport ship, he immediately began applying that knowledge to alien warfare. They fought in straight lines. They believed in overwhelming force, direct attacks, crushing their enemies through sheer power. They had never encountered guerrilla tactics. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight fair. When Admiral's fleet entered the system, they found the prison world defended by only 20 ships. The Admiral laughed and ordered a direct assault. The 20 ships scattered, fleeing in different directions. The fleet gave chase, breaking formation to hunt down the smaller vessels. That was when the traps activated. Had spent weeks mining the space around 4. Hidden bombs, disguised as debris, floated in carefully calculated positions. When the ships broke formation, they flew directly into kill zones. 30 ships died in the first minute. The remaining vessels tried to regroup, but the human ships kept them separated, attacking from unexpected angles, disappearing before they could return fire. Minyu commanded the battle from 4's surface, watching sensor data and giving orders that seemed insane but worked perfectly. "They do not understand," Minyu said too as they watched another ship explode. "They think war is about strength. It is not. War is about making your enemy fight on your terms, not theirs." The Battle of 4 lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the punitive fleet no longer existed. 170 ships destroyed, 30 captured. Human casualties, 11 dead, 40 wounded. Across the galaxy, species that had lived in fear for centuries heard the news. They could be beaten, they could bleed. And the humans were just getting started. More ships arrived at 4 every day. Freed prisoners from other worlds, deserters from service, merchants and smugglers who smelled opportunity in the chaos. The coalition, as they began to call themselves, grew from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. Negotiated alliances with species that had never worked together before, built engines and weapons that made the look primitive. Minyu trained commanders who had never imagined they could challenge the Empire, healed the wounded and kept the living alive, built machines that performed miracles, and watched it all, planning the next step. "We are not just building an army," he told his fellow humans one night. "We are building a future, a galaxy where every species can stand as equals, where no one kneels to anyone else." "They will not surrender," said. "They will fight to the end." Nodded, "Then we will give them an end worth fighting for." The war was only beginning. High Imperator Vex sat alone in his throne room, staring at reports that made no sense. 17 star systems had declared independence from the Empire. 40 more were in open revolt. Supply lines that had run smoothly for centuries were now under constant attack. Soldiers who had never questioned orders were beginning to desert. And at the heart of every disaster, there were humans. Vex had ruled the Empire for 300 years. He had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and expanded territory into every corner of the galaxy. He had never encountered a threat he could not destroy. But these humans were different. They were weak. The reports all agreed on that. They needed absurd amounts of food and water. They slept for hours every day, leaving themselves helpless. They had no natural weapons, no armor, no venom or claws. By every measure the Empire used to judge threats, they should have been classified as prey animals. Yet they kept winning. How? Vex demanded answers from his generals. They had none to give. The humans fought in ways that made no sense to minds. They attacked supply convoys instead of fleets. They struck at night and vanished before dawn. They spread lies and rumors that turned loyal subjects into traitors. They refused to fight fair. Minyu, the human strategist, had introduced concepts the galaxy had never encountered. On Earth, humans had spent 10,000 years fighting each other, developing tactics and strategies for every possible situation. Guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, asymmetric conflict, words that meant nothing to them but spelled their doom. Do not attack their strength, Minyu taught the coalition commanders. Attack their weakness, make them chase shadows, make them doubt themselves. An enemy who does not trust his own soldiers is already half defeated. The Empire's greatest weakness was its own cruelty. For 12,000 years, they had ruled through fear. They had crushed conquered species under their boots, treating them as slaves and animals. They had never imagined those species might fight back. Now those species were rising everywhere. Understood this better than anyone. She had been a cultural anthropologist on Earth, studying how societies formed and fell apart. When she looked at the Empire, she saw the cracks that others missed. They had castes, layers of society where some were born to rule and others were born to serve. The lower castes lived difficult lives, little better than the species they had conquered. They followed orders because they feared punishment, not because they believed in the Empire. Began broadcasting messages directly to those lower castes. You are not your masters, her transmission said. You are slaves just like the rest of us. The high castes use you as tools, spend your lives in wars that benefit only them. Join us and we will treat you as equals. At first no one listened. The fear was too deep, too old. But slowly soldiers began to desert. Lower caste workers began to sabotage their own factories. Ships disappeared from patrol routes, their crews defecting to the coalition. The Empire was tearing itself apart from the inside. High Imperator Vex responded with the only strategy he understood: more force. He ordered the complete extermination of the human species. Every ship was to be hunted. Every world where humans had been found was to be burned to ash. Any species that helped them would be destroyed without mercy. But the threats only drove more systems to join the rebellion. Better to die fighting than to wait for them to kill them anyway. The war entered its second year. The coalition had grown from a handful of escaped prisoners to a force of 3,000 ships from 40 different species. They controlled a quarter of the galaxy, and their territory expanded every month. Stood on the bridge of his flagship, a captured dreadnought that his crews had renamed the Soul's Vengeance. Through the viewing screens, he could see the assembled coalition fleet stretching across space like a river of lights. "Are we ready?" he asked. Minyu stood beside him, studying tactical displays. "As ready as we will ever be. They have pulled most of their remaining fleet back to defend Prime. If we can break through, we can end this war in one battle." Prime was the heart of the Empire, the world where their species had first evolved. The High Council ruled from there, and the greatest shipyards in the galaxy orbited above it. Taking Prime would not just defeat the Empire, it would destroy it completely. "Casualties?" asked. "High," Minyu admitted. "Even with our advantages, they have superior numbers. Many of our people will not survive this battle." Nodded slowly. He had known this moment would come. 2 years ago, he had been a frozen body in a stasis pod, drifting through empty space. Now he commanded the largest fleet the galaxy had ever seen, and he was about to lead them into the greatest battle in history. The weight of it pressed down on him like a physical force. "Every species in this fleet has spent centuries under rule," said quietly. "They have been slaves, prisoners, animals to be hunted for sport. They joined us because we offered them something the Empire never did: hope." He turned to face Minyu. "We cannot fail them." The coalition fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, crossing the vast darkness between stars in moments. When they emerged above Prime, the defense fleet was waiting for them. 6,000 ships faced 3,000. The odds were impossible. They attacked immediately, confident in their superior numbers. Their ships moved in perfect formation, following strategies that had worked for 10,000 years. Smiled. "Execute Pattern 7, he ordered. The coalition fleet scattered like frightened birds, exactly as they expected. The commanders ordered pursuit, breaking their perfect formation to chase the fleeing ships. That was when the second coalition fleet appeared. Had spent months negotiating secret alliances with species that officially remained neutral. They had promised not to join the rebellion openly, but they had agreed to provide ships with volunteer crews, operating under no flag, answering to no government. 2,000 fresh vessels emerged from behind Prime's moons, catching the fleet in a crossfire. The battle became chaos. Ships exploded in silence, filling space with debris and fire. The coalition forces used every trick Menu had taught them, attacking from unexpected angles, targeting command vessels, disrupting communications. Engine designs proved their worth. Coalition ships moved faster than anything they had ever seen, dancing around enemy fire like shadows. Weapons that she had designed cut through armor like paper. The battle lasted 9 days. 9 days of constant fighting, of ships dying in fire and darkness, of commanders making impossible decisions and soldiers performing impossible deeds. 9 days that changed the galaxy forever. When it finally ended, the fleet was broken. 2/3 of their ships drifted dead in space. High Imperator Vex was captured aboard his own flagship, trying to flee to safety. Stood before the leader, looking up at the creature that had ordered the extinction of his species. "Your empire is finished," said. "Your council will surrender or we will take Prime by force." Vex bared his fangs. "You think you have won. We ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years. We will return. We will rebuild. And when we do, we will hunt your species until not one human remains." Shook his head slowly. "No, you will not, because when you fall, we will build something better, something where no single species can dominate all others, something where every world has a voice." He turned to leave. "Your empire was built on fear. Ours will be built on hope. That is why you lost." Behind him, the High Imperator screamed in rage, but there was nothing left to say. The war was over. The Galactic Empire did not die in a single day. It crumbled slowly over the following decade, collapsing system by system like a building with no foundation. Worlds that had paid tribute for centuries declared independence. Species that had bowed for generations stood tall for the first time. And in the spaces left behind, something new began to grow. Stood before the assembled representatives of 100 species, gathered in the great hall that had once held the High Council. The chamber was massive, built to intimidate with its towering columns and dark stone walls. But today it held not fear but possibility. "You have offered me a crown," said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You have called me Liberator, Conqueror, Emperor. I refuse all of these titles." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some faces showed confusion, others showed suspicion. A few showed something like hope. "Humanity did not cross the stars to become the new," continued. "We did not fight this war to replace one empire with another. We fought because we believed in something better, something no one in this galaxy has tried before." He gestured to the representatives around him. "Every species here has a voice. Every world, large or small, powerful or weak, deserves to be heard. I propose we build a galactic assembly where no single species can dominate all others, where decisions are made together, not forced from above." The debate lasted for months. Species that had been enemies for centuries learned to sit in the same room without fighting. Former subjects struggled to believe they could speak freely. Lower caste, who had defected during the war, faced hatred from those they had once oppressed. But slowly, painfully, The assembly took shape. Became its first speaker, using the diplomatic skills she had learned on Earth to bridge gaps that seemed impossible. She sat in endless meetings, listening to grievances that had festered finding compromises that no one had imagined possible. The assembly will not be perfect, she told after one particularly difficult session. Every species has its own history, its own pain, its own demands. Making them work together will take generations. Then we start now, replied. Every journey begins with a single step. The humans spread across the galaxy, sharing knowledge they had brought from Earth and discoveries they made along the way. Established medical networks that connected 1,000 worlds. Diseases that had plagued species for centuries were studied, understood, and cured within years. Hospitals rose on worlds where medicine had been primitive or forbidden. Doctors trained in human techniques saved millions of lives. Every life has value, told her students. Every species, every individual, every single being. That is the foundation of medicine. Never forget it. Led the construction of a new communications grid that wrapped around the entire galaxy. Information that once took months to travel now arrived in moments. Scientists on distant worlds could collaborate on projects. Artists could share their work across species barriers. Families separated by war could find each other again. Communication is more important than weapons, said. When people can talk to each other, they stop being enemies. When they stop being enemies, they stop fighting. Founded the Peacekeepers, a multi-species force trained to protect the Assembly's decisions. They were not conquerors like they had been. They were defenders, guardians, protectors of the peace that so many had died to create. We do not fight to control, taught his recruits. We fight to protect. There is a difference and you must never forget it. Pushed the boundaries of science further than anyone had imagined. Her faster-than-light designs became the foundation for a new era of exploration. Ships traveled to the edges of the galaxy, finding wonders no one had ever seen. They discovered ancient ruins, strange life forms, mysteries that would take centuries to understand. The universe is infinite, said. We have barely begun to explore it. That is what makes science beautiful. There will always be more to discover. Minyu wrote the definitive text on military theory, studying every battle of the war and extracting lessons that would shape galactic defense for generations. His work ensured that no single species could ever dominate the others through force again. War is the failure of every other option, Minyu wrote. Study it carefully so that you may prevent it. And documented everything. She recorded the history of humanity's arrival, the war that followed, the peace that emerged. She interviewed survivors, collected artifacts, and preserved stories that might otherwise be forgotten. History is how we remember who we are, said. If we forget where we came from, we will not know where we are going. Years passed. The coalition became the Assembly. The Assembly became the Galactic Union. Worlds that had never known anything but war learned peace. Species that had been enemies found common ground. The Eternal Horizon, the great ship that had carried humanity across the void, was recovered from deep space. Engineers restored it carefully, treating every panel and wire with respect. When the restoration was complete, the ship was moved to orbit above Prime, now renamed Hope's Dawn. It became a museum, a monument to the journey that had changed everything. Visitors came from across the galaxy to see it. They walked through the corridors where frozen humans had slept for 300 years. They read plaques describing Earth, a blue and green world that no longer existed. They studied the stasis pods, the engines, the desperate hope of a dying species reaching for the stars. And they asked the question that everyone asked: how did such fragile creatures conquer an empire? The human guides always gave the same answer. We did not conquer anyone, they said. We simply refused to be conquered ourselves. That is the human way. No matter how dark the night, no matter how impossible the odds, we do not give up. We fight, we hope, we survive. Lived to see the Galactic Union celebrate its 50th anniversary. He was old by then, his dark hair gray, his body worn by decades of service. But his eyes were the same as they had always been, calculating, patient, full of quiet determination. He stood on a balcony overlooking Hope's dawn, watching ships from 1,000 worlds arrive for the celebration. Colors and shapes that would have been unimaginable on Earth filled the sky. Stood beside him, her own hair silver now. Do you ever think about what would have happened if they had just left us alone, if they had never found the eternal horizon? Consider the question. We would have drifted forever, frozen, forgotten, a dead ship carrying dead dreams through empty space. And now, he smiled. Now we are everywhere. Our ideas have spread to every corner of the galaxy. Species that had never imagined freedom now govern themselves. Children who would have grown up as slaves play freely in the light. He looked at with eyes that had seen so much. War and peace, death and rebirth, the end of one era and the beginning of another. The thought they were capturing a specimen when they found me, said. They thought they were studying a primitive animal. They never understood what they had actually found. What was that? Hope said. They found hope, and hope once planted cannot be destroyed. Below them, the celebration continued. Music from 100 worlds mixed together into something new and beautiful. Representatives from species that had once been enemies danced together beneath the stars. And in the museum that had once been a desperate generation ship, a new group of visitors read the plaque at the entrance. It described humanity's journey, the death of Earth, the long sleep between stars, the awakening in a galaxy ruled by tyrants. It ended with words that had become famous across the Union. In the vast darkness between stars, humanity found not monsters to fear, but tyrants to topple. And in toppling them, they taught the galaxy what it meant to be free. The visitors read these words, looked at each other and smiled. They understood. Somewhere in the universe, there would always be darkness. There would always be those who sought to conquer, to dominate, to crush hope beneath their boots. But there would also always be those who refused to kneel. That was the lesson humanity had taught the galaxy. That was the legacy they left behind. And it would burn forever, bright as any star.